Here are the 5 most bizarre UFO stories ever shared on Joe Rogan's podcast. In episode 2194, former Pentagon insider Luis Elizondo described a craft unlike anything on Earth. Larger than an oil rig, it moved beneath the ocean at impossible speeds, hundreds of knots faster than any submarine could dream of. What followed was a glimpse into technology that seems to bend space and time itself.
People often ask me what's the most compelling thing I've ever seen, and the truth is, that's the most frustrating part. I can't talk about the most compelling cases. I've seen them, my colleagues have seen them, and video continues to come in on a regular basis that would leave you speechless. But it's classified and I can't share it with the public. That's the burden I carry, but let me take you inside what I can talk about. Because even that is extraordinary. First, some context. You might ask, what about all the civilian sightings? Why not use those? And the answer is, we weren't allowed to. Back in the 1960s and 70s, the U.S. intelligence community crossed the line spying on civilians, tracking students, gathering data they weren't supposed to. Congress stepped in and said, never again. Laws were passed, rules put in place, and from then on the Department of Defense was forbidden from collecting or storing intelligence on American citizens. That meant that during my time in government, our focus was strictly on military-sourced information. Civilian videos, eyewitness accounts, we couldn't even touch them. But frankly, we didn't need to. Because what the military had, the data and the sensors we had access to, was overwhelming on its own. High-resolution video, radar, multiple sensor systems, all capturing the same things. It left no doubt. Let me give you one example. I can't tell you where this happened or what platform recorded it. But there is video, high-resolution military video, of something that defies everything we know. Picture an offshore oil derrick. You know how massive those are? They're like floating cities, entire blocks of steel towering above the water. This video shows one of those structures, clear as day. And then beneath the surface, an object moves past. Larger than the oil derrick itself, traveling underwater at speeds calculated between 450 and 550 knots for comparison. Submarines, the fastest ones ever built, struggle to break 40 knots underwater. At those speeds, water becomes like concrete. It should be impossible. And yet here was something enormous, silent, gliding faster than anything we've ever engineered. Bigger than an oil city and moving like it didn't care about physics. That's when you realize we're dealing with something beyond aircraft, beyond submarines, beyond our definitions. This is why the terminology changed. For decades, the word UFO, unidentified flying object, was used. But flying implies wings, lift, propulsion. These things don't fly, they move through air, through water, possibly even space. Seamlessly. At first, we shifted to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. But that didn't capture it either, because aerial still implies the sky. And what we were seeing was transmedium craft moving from one environment to another without slowing, without compromising, air, sea, maybe even space. So now the term is unidentified anomalous phenomena. Because these things aren't bound to one domain. They cross all of them. Now, humans have built transmedium craft. Seaplanes, for example. But a seaplane is a compromise. It's not a great boat, and it's not a great plane. The space shuttle, another example, can orbit the Earth, but when it comes back down, it flies like a brick. Because in engineering, there are always trade-offs, but these craft, they don't compromise. They move through different mediums, air, water, maybe space without losing performance. That tells us their technology is fundamentally different from anything we understand. We brought in some of the best scientists, people like Dr. Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis. Their conclusion was simple. If you can do one thing, everything else becomes possible. That one thing is creating a localized bubble, insulating the craft from the effects of Earth's gravity and the warping of space-time. Most people think of gravity as something that pulls an apple down from a tree. But that's just the effect of gravity. Gravity itself is the warping of space-time. And space and time are not separate. They're two sides of the same coin. If you could create a bubble around a craft that insulated it from that warping, then inside that bubble, time and space would be experienced differently than outside. That would explain why these craft don't need wings, why they don't need engines spewing fire out the back. They're not fighting gravity, they're bypassing it. That's also why they appear to accelerate instantaneously. Why they move at hypersonic speeds without sonic booms, without heat signatures. They may not be accelerating at all. They may be bending the medium itself, taking shortcuts through spacetime. I remember Hal giving us a lecture, 3 hours, equations covering the board. For us, it was the epiphany moment. Suddenly, all the impossible observables we'd been struggling with made sense. Imagine this. You want to fly from Los Angeles to Baltimore. At 500 miles an hour, it takes you 5 hours. Now imagine you could compress spacetime just slightly, bring the 2 points closer together. Now the same trip takes 1 hour at the same apparent speed. To you, inside the bubble, it feels normal. But to an outside observer, it looks like instantaneous acceleration, impossible speed, physics-defying movement. That's the reality these crafts suggest. Not better engines, not faster wings, but a different relationship with space-time itself. Now, how much of this is theoretical and how much comes from recovered materials? That's where I must be careful. I recently went through a lengthy Pentagon review process for something I wrote. It took nearly a year. Everything I say here is cleared, and what I can say is this. There is compelling evidence that the US government is in possession of exotic material not made by human hands. Beyond that, I can't elaborate. I'm not authorized, but the fact remains something exists. Something that doesn't fit into the framework of human technology. So why talk about this now? Why allow this conversation at all? 2 reasons. First, the cat's out of the bag. Cell phones, doorbell cameras, social media, the world is watching, whether the Pentagon wants it or not. It's the worst kept secret on the planet. Second, unlike the Cold War era, there are factions inside the government that want disclosure. People who believe humanity deserves to know. Of course, there are others who hate me for saying even this much. But the shift is happening. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. So here's the truth. We have data, we have video, we have materials. And some of them were not made by us. That's not science fiction. That's not rumor. That's not conspiracy theory. That's reality.
Elizondo spoke of craft that don't need wings or engines, vehicles that may insulate themselves from gravity by warping the fabric of space-time. He hinted at exotic materials not made by human hands, locked away by the government. If true, then we are not witnessing advanced aircraft. We are witnessing a different order of technology altogether. In episode number 2318 of the Joe Rogan Experience, propulsion expert Harold "Sonny" White shared his perspective on some of the most compelling UFO accounts ever recorded, from the Navy's Tic Tac encounter to the infamous Rendlesham Forest incident. He weighed them against the cutting edge of physics and propulsion. What he revealed was both fascinating and deeply unsettling.
I spend my days at the edge of what we think physics can do, where propulsion, fields, and the structure of the vacuum all blur together. Because of that, people assume I'm automatically in on every UFO story that hits the news. Truth is I'm agnostic. I have colleagues and friends who follow every headline and pore over every leaked video. I read the literature, I see what's in the media, and I certainly don't dismiss people out of hand. But for me, unless I can take a piece of evidence and translate it into work I can do in the lab into an experiment, a test device, a line of inquiry that moves the ball even a millimeter, I try to keep some distance. That's not cynicism. It's discipline. Still, some accounts won't let you look away. Take the Navy Tic Tac. You know, the one fighter pilots on a training mission. Multiple witnesses, multiple platforms, radar tracks, the works. When you look at an event like that, you don't just have a single narrator describing lights in the sky. You have data, you have corroboration, and you have people I take seriously telling me, I saw this and I can't explain it. My instinct is to try to falsify, benignly stress test a mundane explanation first. For a while, I entertain something that sits adjacent to stealth, volumetric projection. There's a real technology. Two intersecting lasers focused into a point in open air. Put enough energy into that focal point and you ionize the air, creating a tiny plasma pixel that glows. Raster those pixels in 3 dimensions and you can build a free space volumetric display. No screen, the air is the screen. Theoretically, you could sketch a shape in mid-air that looks like an object. If you could scale it, maybe you could cue pilots to chase what you want them to chase, pull them to a range, bias the engagement. Geometry, lead them away from whatever a test director might want to keep undisturbed. That's how my engineering mind works. What if games that converge on an action plan, but right away things break, ionized air glows? It scintillates. Those pixels flicker at the margins. The specular response, the way light reflects, wouldn't read like a solid matte surface. Then you listen to the eyewitness who got within visual range and says, flat, featureless, torpedo-like, white matte, not pearlescent, not emissive. That pushes against the projection hypothesis. And even if someone had an incredibly advanced system, the radar problem lingers. Plasma tends to absorb and polarize electromagnetic waves, not reflect them like a discrete solid mass. Would it appear on radar as a target with kinematics consistent with a vehicle? It might, is the honest answer in a few edge cases, but it's not a great fit. The reporting we have says it tracked like a real object. Multiply that by multiple platforms and observers and you realize, yes, you can fool one sensor. Fooling several in coherent agreement? That's much harder, so I filed plasma projection into the bin marked interesting but insufficient and left the tic-tac where it deserves to sit. A high-rigor case that resists simple answers. My work occasionally bumps into ideas people love to call sci-fi. Some of it traces back to Hal Puthoff's thinking about the polarizable vacuum, treating the quantum vacuum as a medium with properties that, under the right conditions, can be modified. I have a stack of his papers in a drawer. I pull them out often. They explore whether you can, in principle, nudge the vacuum's permittivity and permeability, and by doing so, alter how light and inertia behave locally. It's hard-nosed work equations, boundary conditions, not late-night campfire talk. And it intersects with propulsion. That's one reason certain stories don't sound impossible to me, even if I'm agnostic about their provenance. People have strong reactions. Some think he's the most important whistleblower in modern history. Others think it's fantasy. I'm not here to be judge or jury. But the outline of what he described is, at minimum, technically coherent in a way most UFO explanations aren't. He says he worked at Los Alamos even when officialdom denied it. His name shows up on a staff list. He knew the building, the security people, the layout. He tells a story, flown at odd hours to a desert site, S4, shown a disk he called the sport model, powered by an unknown element 115 at the time whose reactor created a gravitational field. He describes pointing the craft falling in the direction of curvature rather than pushing through air with thrust. You can dismiss him if you want, but notice the physics schema, a local modification of space-time that allows motion by bending the medium, not pushing through it. That's almost word for word how a warp bubble reads. Different language, same diagram. Do I know if Lazar actually worked on a disk? I don't. I'm agnostic, and agnostic isn't code for no. It means I can't instrument it in my lab. But the mechanism he talks about is not inherently nonsense. In fact, it brushes up against the edges of things my community explores seriously. All of that I can slot somewhere in my head. The tic-tac sits in a high confidence bucket of this happened and our models don't capture it. Lazar sits in a pattern-matching bucket with a big asterisk that says plausible physics narrative, provenance contested. And then there's Rendlesham. The Rendlesham Forest incident is where my internal sorting hat throws up its hands. It's not that it's unbelievable, it's that it refuses to map onto behavior, ours, animals, machines, anything. It short-circuits the part of your brain that looks at motion and says, intent. Let me tell you why. Late December 1980, Suffolk, England. The Cold War is still very much alive. The U.S. Air Force operates out of RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters under lease. 2 days after Christmas, in the early hours of December 26th, security personnel see lights in the woods. At first they think crash. That's consistent lights at low altitude near a base. You grab a team, you go, they enter the forest. It's cold, quiet, and then suddenly not quiet at all. Animals on a nearby farm are agitated, disturbed. The team sees an object among the trees, triangular, metallic, with pulsing red, blue, and white lights. One of the men, Sergeant Jim Peniston, gets close enough to touch it. He describes raised symbols along the surface, glyphs under his fingertips. He sketches them in a notebook, geometric marks that don't read like serial numbers or maintenance stencils. They read like intentional iconography. Before anyone can secure the site, the object lifts silently through the trees and shoots skyward. No roar, no downwash, no debris field. Just gone. You could stop the story there and it would already be unusual. But 2 nights later, December 28th, it returns or something does. This time, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, the deputy base commander, leads the response personally. Halt does something only officers with experience and discipline do. In the heat of it. He records what he's witnessing. There is an audio tape from that night you can listen to. You hear a trained voice trying to remain steady, bearings, angles, descriptions of beams of light cutting through the trees, red lights that split and merge, lights that seem to send shafts downward toward the base itself. You also hear men describing marks on the ground, 3 indentations forming a triangle, as if something heavy had rested there. They take radiation readings at those spots and note they're elevated compared to background, not Chernobyl. Just anomalously high for a quiet English forest at midnight. This is not one man musing afterward. It's not, I saw something once. It's multiple trained observers on multiple nights with contemporaneous notes, sketches, measurements, and audio. It's a deputy base commander willing to put his name on a memo to the Ministry of Defense, the famous Halt memo detailing an encounter with an apparent UFO in the woods near an American base. For a long time, it's quiet publicly. Then, years later, that memo surfaces and Rendlesham becomes a proper case file, not a campfire story. Today, there's literally a UFO trail in the forest. You can walk the path. There's even a replica of the object, a sculpture with a hand-like symbol on it. I've seen people call it a hamsa, and others point out it's not exactly that. The symbol taxonomy gets slippery fast, but stand there. Look at that silver form between the trees, and you will feel why the world hasn't let this one go. Here's what breaks me about Rendlesham. Behavior. With the tic-tac, you can tell a story, capability, demonstration, countermaneuver, reaction to our aircraft. There's an engagement logic. Even if it's alien, it behaves in a way your brain recognizes as purposeful. With Rendlesham, what was it doing? If you read the primary accounts, out in the woods with blinky lights doing weird stuff. That's not me being flippant. That's me being faithful to how it reads. Blinky lights, beams, triangle marks, raised glyphs. Animals. Losing their minds. A touchable surface and then gone. If you've ever watched an octopus in a tank, you know, there's a certain cross-species resonance you can infer motivation. It's going for the crab. It wants to hide under a rock. You can often sense what a dog, a shark, a dolphin wants to do in a given moment. The Rendlesham object destroys that guessing machine. It doesn't feel like reconnaissance. It doesn't feel like theater. It doesn't feel like a malicious probe or a benign greeting. It feels like something operating on a vector we don't have, as if your laptop looked at a thunderstorm and tried to infer the storm's intentions. Wrong ontology. Now, I'm a propulsion guy. When people ask, how could something do that? I don't shrug and say, magic. I reach for frameworks. One of those frameworks, again, Comey's from Hal Puthoff and colleagues like Eric Davis. The idea, greatly simplified, is that if you can achieve one key capability, a lot of the impossible observables drop out as secondary effects. That capability is the creation of a localized space-time bubble, a region around a craft that's insulated from the ambient curvature of space-time, gravity, colloquially, and perhaps has its electromagnetic properties shifted as well. People, think of gravity as the force that pulls your phone to the floor. That's the effect of gravity. Gravity is curvature space-time itself warped by mass energy. And space and time are not two separate things you can neatly disaggregate. They are two faces of one manifold. If you can establish a domain around a vehicle where the vacuum behaves differently, its permittivity and permeability altered, its metric gently reshaped, then the craft doesn't need wings or hot exhaust. You are not fighting gravity. You are resculpting the medium you move through. You don't accelerate in the Newtonian sense. You shorten the path. To an outside observer, you appear to make impossible jumps. Pull instantaneous accelerations, cruise at hypersonic speeds with no sonic boom. From inside, it's a Sunday drive, your proper time ticks differently. Your experience of inertia is muted. I sat in a secure room while Hal gave a multi-hour lecture that walked from first principles to this unifying picture. Equations, stress energy. Tensors, not YouTube diagrams. And there was a moment, call it an epiphany, when a half dozen, how on earth, observables suddenly aligned like tumblers in a lock. You could see how a single change in the rules of the vacuum could make all the wildness cohere. If you accept that as a framework, then a lot of what people report, no wings, no control surfaces, no exhaust, no sonic booms, right-angle turns, transmedium travel is not a grab bag of miracles. It's one miracle expressed several ways, but that still doesn't tell me what Rendlesham was doing in the woods. A vehicle capable of sculpting its local metric doesn't need to kneel in a glade. Blink like a Christmas ornament, let a sergeant run his fingers over glyphs, and leave indentations behind for a radiation meter to sniff at. It can, obviously. But why? The tic-tac read like an encounter. Rendlesham reads like a parable one where we don't know the language. There's a parallel discussion that always lurks in the background. Materials. People ask me outright, do we have craft? Do we have pieces? I'm not in a position to adjudicate public claims. I'll tell you something you already know. Hal has stated his belief that there are multiple, I've heard the number 10 craft in government possession. I know that claim. And I also know it's entirely possible for someone to be 100% correct and still be unprovable to a scientist in a lab without a chain of custody and a sample on a bench. So I keep that claim in a mental room marked substantive if substantiated. For my part, I'm rigorous about what I'll endorse, but I won't pretend the edges aren't there. I've read clear-and-screen discussions that talk about exotic materials in a way that suggests non-human origin. I've heard language like not made by human hands. That doesn't mean I have a piece in a drawer. It means the rumor is persistent, and the people repeating it are not the sort who fabricate legends for fun. That's all I'll say. If you step back, a pattern emerges. On one end, high-rigor operational encounters. The tic-tac that square up with physics. Anomalies but behave like an opponent or a test article might. In the middle, narratives like lasers that rhyme with warp bubble talk and right or wrong, at least fit a model. And then there's Rendlesham, an object in trees, blinking, marking ground, etching symbols, splitting light into shafts that fall on a base. No message, no dogfight, no crash. Just a fairy tale wrong-footing a military base. It's a case that, if authentic and the paper trail says it is at least that suggests interface without intention we can parse, that's what unsettles me, not that it's beyond our technology, but that it's beyond our psychology. I can work with beyond our tech. That's a challenge. But beyond our model of agency, that's an ontological problem. It's like we're ants watching a violinist and cataloging the vibrations without any concept of music. So where does that leave a propulsion guy? Exactly where I started, agnostic but listening. I keep reading Hal's papers on the polarizable vacuum. I peer at materials science with fresh eyes. I take seriously the idea that a single capability modify the local vacuum state could make a dozen impossibles fall like dominoes. I take seriously that multiple trained observers in 1980 walked into a forest and experienced something so far outside their priors that 4 decades later, we're still walking the UFO trail. trying to make sense of it. And I admit that there are days when the Rendlesham file sits open on my desk like a riddle I'm not equipped to solve, not because the physics is impossible, but because the behavior refuses to stand still long enough to be modeled. If you were waiting for a punchline, and therefore, X, you won't get it from me. I don't sell certainty. I build devices and write equations and look for edges I can touch. But if you ask me which stories move the needle for a propulsion physicist who doesn't spook easily, I'll say the tic-tac because the data stack won't go away. Warp bubble frameworks because they map the impossible onto something like a first principles diagram. And Rendlesham because it breaks logic in a way that suggests we are not just facing unknown technology, but unknown intent. That last part is what most people really mean when they ask about UFOs. They don't want to know about permittivity and permeability. They want to know if someone is here, and if so, why. Physics can sometimes sketch a how. Rendlesham hints that why may be a dimension we haven't learned to measure yet. Until then, I'll keep my head down in the lab, my papers within reach, and my mind open enough to let in the cases that won't be bullied into silence. Some stories you outgrow, some grow on you. Rendlesham is the latter. It's the one that sits in the corner of the room, quiet and uncooperative, daring you to admit the obvious. Not everything that's real is ready to be understood. And if you ask me whether I think there's anything to this weathercraft like the tic-tac, or something that stood among those trees might be operating by insulating themselves from gravity, by reshaping space-time around them like a glove, I'll tell you the same thing I tell my students and my friends. It only takes one. One device, one sample, one repeatable measurement. Then the rest of the dominoes, from matte white torpedoes to silent glades and carved glyphs, will fall into place. Until then, Rendlesham remains what it has always been, a story that doesn't just challenge our science, it challenges our sense of sense.
From Navy pilots chasing impossible craft, to Lazar's tales of warp-like drives, to a glowing object in Rendlesham Forest leaving radiation and symbols behind, these stories stretch the limits of what we call reality. Harold Sunny White doesn't dismiss them, but admits some encounters break even the frameworks of physics itself. If true, they suggest technology and intelligence far beyond anything humanity has ever known. In episode number 2288 of the Joe Rogan Experience, legendary UFO researcher Jacques Vallée shared some of the most overlooked yet deeply compelling cases of close encounters. These weren't just lights in the sky, but craft that left physical traces and beings that looked into human eyes. Investigated not by amateurs but by police, militaries, and even governments, these stories resist dismissal and hint at something far stranger than science fiction.
To my knowledge, there has never been a clear correlation between the creatures described in 3 of the cases I've studied most closely: Trinity in New Mexico, Socorro, also in New Mexico, and Valençol in France. Yet they all share remarkable similarities. In each, witnesses reported humanoid beings about 3 feet tall, breathing our air and able to recognize signals from humans. Communication wasn't always verbal. Many described it as mental images or impressions that simply appeared in their minds. Let me start with Socorro. That case was investigated from the very beginning, not by hobbyists or fringe groups, but by official authorities. It began with a local policeman who saw both the craft and the beings themselves. Terrified, he described what he had witnessed before the object took off at incredible speed. At first, he thought it might be some secret military gadget being tested in the desert. That region of New Mexico was, after all, near test ranges where experimental weapons were developed soon after the FBI became involved. They weren't technically supposed to, the case wasn't under federal jurisdiction, but they happened to be in town on another matter. They stepped in to help preserve evidence in their meticulous FBI way. Then the state police arrived and conducted their own investigation. Later, experts from the nearby base were called in, men trained in explosives, weapons recovery, and rocket systems. Why? Because they thought this might be something that had strayed from the Trinity range. If so, the military could have liability for damages. So from the outset, Socorro was treated very seriously. I have the entire file. It's thick, full of testimony, technical notes, and measurements. Yet nobody today looks at it. Washington now claims they want to solve the UFO mystery by looking at sightings from the last 12 months' blurry lights in the sky. What kind of science is that? Real science digs into historical records, especially those investigated by multiple agencies. Now, let me tell you about Valençol, France. This case involved a farmer who grew valuable crops used for perfume production. These weren't casual fields of lavender. This was expensive, high-quality agriculture, his livelihood. One morning, at about 5 a.m., before the summer sun became unbearable, he went to water his plants. There, in the middle of his field, sat a strange contraption. Egg-shaped, the size of a mid-sized truck, crushing the plants beneath it. In front of it stood two small humanoid figures. They looked human, 2 eyes, breathing air, yet distinctly other. As he approached, one of them raised a device from its belt and aimed it at him. Instantly, he was paralyzed. This was not unconsciousness. He could still see, still think. He simply could not move. Doctors I've spoken with explained there is a form of paralysis that affects only the motor nerves, leaving awareness intact. That matched exactly what he described. Frozen in place, he watched as the beings calmly returned to their craft. Then, with shocking speed, it shot upward like a bullet fired from a gun and vanished mid-air. This was not the word of some anonymous witness. The farmer was respected, well-off, and his wife was the mayor of the town. During the war, he had fought in the resistance in the Alps against the Germans. He was a man of honor. The gendarmes handled him carefully because of his reputation. He did not want publicity. He refused TV interviews. He didn't even want to speak to officials from Paris, but he confided that during the encounter, there had been more, a kind of communication. Private and profound, he hinted at a sense of something else, something beyond normal human life, not religion exactly, but a message that seemed to transcend reality as he knew it. It was personal, intimate, and he swore secrecy about details. Even decades later, when I visited with government colleagues, he maintained this quiet dignity. The parallels to Trinity and Socorro are striking. In all three cases, egg-shaped craft. In all three, small humanoid beings breathing our air. And in all three, witnesses reluctant to share everything, but hinting at communications that touched something deep within them, something like glimpses of a greater meaning. Physical traces were left behind too. Crushed plants in Valençol. Burn marks and impressions in Socorro. These were not hallucinations. Instruments measured radiation, heat, soil disturbance. And yet, skeptics dismissed them as balloons or experimental aircraft. Let me share one more detail that most people have missed. After the Socorro incident, while the authorities were interrogating Officer Lonnie Zamora, the patrolman who had witnessed the craft, another man was driving home from White Sands. He wasn't just anyone, he was the head of the motor pool. At the range, responsible for all vehicles and logistics. Driving with his family, he saw a light over the mountains to the southwest. It grew brighter and brighter. Then suddenly his car died. Radio, ignition, everything. The light intensified, then receded, moving away. Once it disappeared, his car started again. As a responsible officer, he ordered his team the next day to take that car apart. Every screw, every wire, every component. He wanted to know why it had stopped. They found nothing. Nothing mechanical, nothing electrical that explained the failure. He wrote an official report. It was never published, but I've seen it. And it proves beyond doubt that this was not a weather balloon, not a trick of light, not a drunken policeman's story. Something real had interacted with that car's systems. This is why I argue, if governments truly want to study the phenomenon, they should stop limiting themselves to blurry cell phone videos from last year. The real science lies in these older cases documented, measured, investigated at the highest levels. Cases where witnesses were respected, reluctant to speak, but left behind physical proof, and in all of them the same motif appears: small. Humanoid beings, egg-shaped craft, and communications that leave humans with an unshakable sense of mystery.
3 countries, 3 encounters. Three sets of witnesses who saw craft, beings, and left behind evidence that cannot be dismissed. Jacques Vallée reminds us that these aren't legends whispered in the dark. They're cases investigated by police, militaries, and governments. If they're real, then behind the UFO mystery lies something far stranger than we dare imagine. In episode number 1315 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Bob Lazar, the man who exposed government UFO secrets, joins Joe Rogan to dive deep into the groundbreaking revelations that continue to shape UFO research. Lazar shares the untold stories behind the Wilson Memo, the mystery of Element 115, and the advanced technology that has been hidden from the public for decades.
Bob Lazar's involvement with UFOs and reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology goes beyond just speculation. It's a first-hand account of what he experienced in the 1980s. Bob has long been one of the most well-known figures in the UFO world, having worked at a secretive government facility where he was tasked with studying alien technology. However, what truly fascinates him isn't the concept of aliens themselves, but the extraordinary technology they might possess. Lazar's journey into the UFO world began with his work on reverse engineering an unknown craft at a secret government site, commonly referred to as S4. But even more intriguing than the craft itself is the story surrounding the Wilson Memo, a document that has caused a stir in the UFO community. For years, the details of the memo were shrouded in mystery, but Bob Lazar confirms its authenticity. It discusses a conversation between Admiral Wilson and a scientist about the UFO phenomenon, special access programs, and the involvement of private industry in the study of non-terrestrial materials. Lazar's frustration with the ongoing secrecy surrounding UFO research is palpable. He expresses how deeply interested he is in the technology, but he also feels hindered by the lack of progress. According to him, the technology is out there, but the material science needed to understand and reverse engineer it is just beyond our reach, at least for now. The Wilson Memo plays a crucial role in confirming much of what Bob Lazar has been saying for years. The memo outlines a meeting between Admiral Wilson, who was investigating UFOs, and a scientist who had access to the secret programs related to reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. The memo confirms that the government has been involved with UFO research for years, but more importantly, it reveals that private industry has been responsible for holding onto this knowledge. Private aerospace companies, not the government, have been working on UFO-related research and keeping it out of the public eye. Bob Lazar explains how, according to the memo, the government has tried to access these private programs, but they've been denied. This raises the question, why would a private company have control over this kind of technology? Lazar's suspicion is that these companies might be hiding something far more significant than the government has let on. The government's involvement in UFO research has always been wrapped in secrecy, but now we have a glimpse into the power dynamics between the government and private industry, and how the latter seems to control the narrative surrounding UFO technology. But Lazar doesn't just talk about the Wilson Memo. He also touches on his own experiences working on UFOs, his first-hand knowledge of these craft, how they operate, and what they might be made of adds credibility to the UFO narrative. The technology he worked on doesn't just bend the rules of physics. It challenges our very understanding of how the universe works. Lazar stresses that the propulsion systems of these craft are unlike anything we've seen before. And this isn't science fiction, it's real technology. One of the most mind-bending aspects of UFO technology, according to Lazar, is the concept of gravity manipulation. Instead of using traditional propulsion systems which rely on thrust and exhaust, these UFOs manipulate gravity itself. They can create a gravity bubble that shields the craft from the effects of Earth's gravity, allowing them to defy conventional aerodynamic principles. Lazar believes this technology could one day revolutionize travel, making space travel and interstellar journeys a reality. But Lazar's work wasn't just limited to the technology itself. He was also involved in understanding the material properties of the craft. One of the most important aspects of reverse engineering UFO technology is identifying the materials used to construct these craft. Laza has mentioned that one of the materials he worked with was element 115, a substance that was purportedly used to power UFOs. Although element 115 is not currently on the periodic table, Laza's descriptions of it have spurred ongoing debates about the nature of this mysterious element and its potential uses in propulsion systems. The concept of element 115 has become one of the most intriguing aspects of Laza's story. While mainstream science hasn't yet confirmed the existence of element 115, Laza's claims have sparked the interest of physicists and scientists who are now looking for evidence of its existence. Laza's first-hand knowledge of this element and his claims about how it's used in UFO propulsion systems has led many to believe that he's telling the truth. About the technology he worked on, Laza's story isn't just about UFOs and extraterrestrial technology. It's also about the secrecy and the cover-up surrounding it. The government's reluctance to disclose information about UFOs and the technology behind them has led to decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. Laza's role in all of this is significant because he was one of the first to publicly expose the government's secret UFO programs, and he continues to be one of the most credible sources of information on the subject. The Wilson Memo, combined with Laza's first-hand account of working on UFOs, paints a chilling picture of what's really happening behind the scenes. While the public is left to speculate about UFOs, those in the know have been working in secret to unravel the mysteries of extraterrestrial technology. Laza's involvement in these programs has given him a unique perspective on the situation, and his revelations have added a new layer of complexity to the UFO phenomenon. One of the most compelling aspects of Laza's story is his unwavering commitment to the truth. Despite the risk of being ridiculed and discredited, Laza continues to speak out about what he saw and experienced at S4, his dedication to uncovering the truth about UFOs and their technology has made him a key figure in the ongoing UFO debate. However, the story doesn't end with Laza's revelations. The Wilson Memo and other leaked documents suggest that there is much more to the UFO phenomenon than we've been told. The fact that private industry has been involved in UFO research raises even more questions about the extent of government involvement and the true nature of the technology that's being studied. Laza's experiences, combined with the information in the Wilson Memo, point to a larger conspiracy to conceal the truth about UFOs from the public. Despite the secrecy, Laza remains optimistic that one day the truth will come out, as more documents are declassified and more whistleblowers come forward. The veil of secrecy surrounding UFOs will begin to lift. For Laza, the pursuit of truth is not just a personal mission. It's a collective effort to bring the hidden knowledge of UFOs and extraterrestrial technology to light. In the end, the story of Bob Laza is one of both personal sacrifice and extraordinary revelation. His work with UFOs and reverse engineering, alien technology has given us a rare glimpse into a world that has been hidden from the public for decades. While the government may continue to conceal information, Laza's unwavering commitment to exposing the truth has made him one of the most important figures in the UFO community. His story is a testament to the power of curiosity, the pursuit of knowledge, and the unwavering belief that the truth is out there.
Laza's insights into UFO technology and the government's cover-up have changed the way we view the phenomenon. As new revelations continue to surface, we're closer than ever to uncovering the truth. In episode 2065 of the Joe Rogan Experience, whistleblower David Grush, a former US intelligence officer, blew the lid off one of the most profound government cover-ups in modern history. He discussed the US government's long-standing secret UFO recovery programs, the Wilson Memo, and the shocking truth about non-human materials in possession of private industry. Prepare to hear explosive details that will challenge everything you thought you knew about UFOs and the government's involvement in the cover-up.
In a world where UFOs and extraterrestrial life have been the subject of secretive government programs, few voices stand as resolute as David Grush's, a former U.S. intelligence officer with a deep background in the UFO Grush has risked everything to uncover the truth about what the government has hidden from the public for decades. In his explosive conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience, Grush reveals stunning details about early UFO recovery operations, government cover-ups, and the mysterious materials that have been recovered from otherworldly crafts. Buckle up as we dive into Grush's eye-opening testimony. David Grush starts the conversation by discussing the long history of UFO incidents that have been recorded but not widely acknowledged. He explains that UFOs aren't just modern phenomena, they have been occurring for decades, and the governments of the world have been aware of this since the early 20th century. The first well-documented case that Grush brings up is from 1933 in Italy, near the town of Magenta. This incident marks one of the earliest known UFO crashes, and though it may not be as famous as the Roswell incident, it played a significant role in the development of UFO recovery operations. Grush explains that this crash, involving a lenticular-shaped craft, essentially a disc-shaped UFO, was observed by local Italians who were initially puzzled by what they had found. There was no sign of any alien bodies, only the craft itself. What's fascinating is how the Italian military responded. The Italians, not knowing what to make of the craft, contacted the German military to help investigate. Grush describes how, during this time, Mussolini's government had a vested interest in understanding the crashed UFO. The Germans, who were also intrigued, agreed to look at the object together with the Italians. Despite not knowing whose craft it might have been, this early exchange between two European powers set the stage for international collaboration in the field of UFO recovery, as they began to piece together the mysterious nature of these crashes. However, this wouldn't be the last time the Germans would play a role in UFO investigations. Grush shares an intriguing backstory about the involvement of the Vatican and their connection to the U.S. government. He reveals that during the early years of UFO encounters, informal intelligence was being gathered by organizations outside of the U.S. government. One such entity was the Vatican, whose representatives were involved in back-channel communications with the U.S. government, especially during World War II, according to Grush. This secret communication started when the Vatican's own intelligence network became aware of the UFO crash in Italy. This network then began sharing information with the U.S. government, specifically through the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which would later become the CIA. These exchanges allowed the U.S. government to begin learning about the UFO phenomenon from an international perspective, and it was this early involvement that set the foundation for the U.S. government's interest in the subject. This connection between the Vatican and the U.S. government was critical in shaping the narrative of UFO research, as both parties played a role in gathering information and conducting investigations. The U.S. would eventually take the lead in the global effort to understand these extraterrestrial phenomena, but much of the foundational knowledge was obtained through these early international exchanges. As the conversation shifts to the technical aspects of UFO recovery, Grush reveals how the U.S. government has spent decades trying to reverse engineer extraterrestrial technology. After retrieving these craft, the first question that arose was, what are we dealing with here? The U.S. government's goal was clear: understand how these craft operated, and if possible, figure out how to replicate or reverse engineer their technology. For military and defense purposes, the initial analysis of the recovered UFOs was focused on understanding the physical properties of the crafts. Grush notes that these crafts didn't behave like any known aircraft, and their propulsion systems were unlike anything the military had encountered. The crafts didn't rely on traditional jet propulsion, which would make them capable of performing feats that no human-made vehicle could match. In addition, these craft appeared to defy the laws of physics as understood at the time. As Grush delves into the specifics, he explains that while these UFOs were observed performing high-speed maneuvers, such as sharp turns and sudden stops, their propulsion systems remained a mystery. Traditional theories of propulsion, such as jet engines or rockets, could not explain the craft's extraordinary capabilities. The phenomenon led to a shift in research towards other areas of physics, including studies of gravity manipulation, anti-gravity, and other unconventional propulsion theories. Grush also touches on the psychological impact of the reverse engineering process. As scientists worked to understand the technology, they realized that they weren't just dealing with advanced machinery, they were potentially interacting with something from another world. This realization brought both a sense of awe and fear, as the implications of reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology were profound. Perhaps one of the most shocking revelations Grush shares is about the Wilson Memo, a leaked document that has caused a stir in UFO research circles. The Wilson Memo documents a conversation between Admiral Thomas Wilson, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and a scientist who had been working on UFO-related projects. Grush confirms that the memo is authentic and provides a detailed account of Wilson's efforts to gain access to information about UFO recovery programs, which were being run by private companies and not the U.S. government. The Wilson Memo reveals that Wilson had been denied access to the UFO recovery programs by private contractors who were in possession of non-human materials. Grush explains that the memo confirms the existence of secret UFO recovery programs and suggests that private industry has been involved in the UFO phenomenon far more than the public realizes. The U.S. government, in essence, outsourced the research and reverse engineering of UFOs to private companies who had access to the recovered materials. Grush also sheds light on the efforts of former U.S. Senator Harry Reid, who pushed for funding and research into UFO phenomena. Reid, who played a key role in securing funding for the AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, had been aware of the UFO recovery programs but had been kept in the dark about many of the details. Grush reveals that Reid had attempted to gain access to the UFO materials but was denied for decades. Grush's conversation with Reid, which he details in the interview, offers insight into the complexities of government secrecy and the struggle to bring the truth to light. Reid's involvement in securing funding for UFO research programs and his efforts to gain access to the materials confirm that the U.S. government has been aware of the UFO phenomenon for much longer than the public has been told. Grush delves deeper into the role of private industry in UFO research, stating that the government's reliance on private companies has allowed these programs to remain hidden from public view. Grush notes that while government agencies are often criticized for their secrecy, private contractors are even more opaque in their operations, and the private sector has had the final say on many UFO-related projects. According to Grush, the UFO materials have been kept in private hands, and the government has been unable to gain full access to these materials due to the tight control that private contractors maintain. This situation is made even more complex by the fact that some of these contractors are international companies, adding another layer of secrecy and complexity to the situation. As the conversation winds down, Grush reflects on the ongoing challenges in the fight for UFO transparency. He expresses frustration with the lack of accountability within the government and the private sector, noting that while some progress has been made in recent years, much of the information about UFOs and non-human materials remains classified. Grush calls for greater transparency and accountability, urging the government to release the information it has been hiding for decades. He stresses the importance of ensuring that the American public is informed about the UFO phenomenon and that the government is held accountable for its actions. Grush's work is a testament to the ongoing struggle for truth and transparency in a world where the line between science fiction and reality is becoming increasingly blurred.
David Grush's revelations have rocked the world of UFO research, but the battle for the truth is far from over. As more whistleblowers come forward and the government's secrets begin to unravel, we are inching closer to understanding the true nature of the UFO phenomenon. Grush's testimony serves as a reminder that the search for truth is ongoing, and the revelations yet to come could change our understanding of the universe forever.